All right, here's your homework, simplifying trig expressions using, and it's okay to have it out in front of you. Where's mine? Had it. So it's okay to have the trig identities out in front of you. So if, all about practicing is to get to the point where you have these memorized, but you don't have them memorized yet. So make sure you have these out that we're going to use this to simplify. So I see tangent. I said one good rule is to write it in terms, everything in terms of sine and cosine. Cosecant is 1 over sine. And then the signs divide out. 1 over cosine is secant, and you simplified it. Number 2, cotangent is cosine over sine. Secant is 1 over cosine. The cosines divide out, and 1 over sine is cosecant. Oh, I should remind you, as always, right, you should try first. Press pause. That's the power of a video. And then do these problems so that you want to learn it, not because you just want to copy it. Cosecant is 1 over sine. Again, press pause if you want to. Cosine's already that. When I combine them together and multiply it, think of it as a 1, multiply the tops and bottoms together, I get cosine over sine, and then cosine over sine is cotangent. Our goal is no fractions and 1 trig ratio only when we simplify it. All right, press pause and try it. You can do it. Secant is 1 over cosine times sine. Multiply them together, and I get sine over cosine, and that's equal to tangent. You're on a roll. Number 5. Press pause and try it, then I'll do it. Tangent sine over cosine. Cotangent is cosine over sine. We're going to write this as 1 fraction. So the first fraction, we're going to multiply top and bottom times sine. That's sine squared. The second one, we're going to multiply top and bottom by cosine. That's cosine squared. I really like that because I have an identity for that. And then multiply the denominators together. There's your common denominator. So sine squared plus cosine squared is just 1. When I multiply these together, think of a 1 underneath here. Multiply the tops and bottoms together. You get cosine over cosine sine theta. Notice the cosines divide out, and then 1 over sine is cosecant, and you did it. That was a good one, right? Were you able to do that before I did it? I'm really impressed. Number 6 is going to be similar. So look at what we did for number 5. Press pause. This is how you're going to learn. And then try your best for number 6. Then press play. All right, so we're going to do very similar to what we just did. So we have sine theta. Cotangent is cosine over sine. And tangent is sine over cosine. We're then going to write it as 1 fraction. That's going to be cosine squared plus sine squared over sine and cosine. Then we're going to use the Pythagorean identity. So cosine squared plus sine squared is 1 over sine theta, cosine theta. When we multiply it, the sine thetas would divide out, and 1 over cosine is secant. Did you do that by yourself? I'm super proud of you. Number 7. Tangent theta is sine over cosine. Cotangent is cosine over sine. And then we have cosecant squared. Sine divides out, cosine divides out, doesn't equal 0, divides out to 1. And if I want to simplify it further, which I do you know what 1 is equal to? Which trig identity uses 1 as part of it? And that's the Pythagorean ones, right? And so what does 1 equal? and it's sine squared plus cosine squared. So I'm going to put that in. So 1 is sine squared plus cosine squared. And then notice that cosine squared and cosine squared, and we're only left with 1. We'd like to be left with one term, no fractions, one trig ratio. There you go. This had 2 terms to it, still simplified, but you could have gone further. Number 8. This, for number 8, we need to do some algebra. And so this is called a difference of squares. They're almost exactly the same, but one's adding and one's subtracting. So we don't need to FOIL completely. We just need to go first times first, which is secant squared, and then last times last, which is -1. When I look to see what does secant squared equal, it's tangent squared plus 1. So I'm going to put in tangent squared plus 1, and then 1 take away 1 is done, and we've simplified it. One trig ratio, one term, no fractions. Number 9. Again, I noticed that we have a difference of squares. They're exactly the same except one's adding, one's subtracting. So we're going to go first times first, which is secant squared. Last times last, which is negative tangent squared. And then I'm going to use the same identity that I just did. So what does secant squared equal? Tangent squared plus 1. So I'm going to write tangent squared plus 1. And then what's tangent squared? Subtract tangent squared? Well, that is 0. And so what's my answer? The answer is 1. Number 10. What's 1 plus tangent squared? Tangent squared plus 1 is secant squared. So I'm going to right away, and I know there's a connection between cosine squared and secant squared. So that's why I went that direction. Secant squared is the reciprocal. So if you do the reciprocal, just keep the exponent when you flip it, and then notice they divide out, and this answer is 1. All right, last page, number 11. These are going to be a little bit more challenging. We'll do it together. We're not going to give up. All right, I need to write this as one fraction. I hope it starts to look better. No more fuzziness. It still kind of looks fuzzy. Here, see, sometimes if I go super close and come back, it decides it's going to get focused. There it is. I need to write this as one fraction. So instead of 1, I write 1 plus sine theta over 1 plus sine theta. And then I have negative cosine squared theta. There are no like terms, so they just go beside each other. But now we have like terms. I mean, we have common denominators. It's going to be crazier. Let me see if this helps. If I get a little closer like this. I think that might help. All right. Next, I need to do a substitution. So what does cosine squared equal? So go back to your trig identities. And remember, I can rearrange this. So cosine squared by itself, I would subtract sine squared. So cosine squared is 1 subtract sine squared. That's what I'm going to do. Because I want everything in terms of 1 ratio. So I said it's 1 subtract sine squared. Now I'm going to combine like terms. 1 take away 1, it's gone, and I'm left with sine theta. A negative times a negative is plus sine squared. Next, we're going to do some algebra. If I factor here, what do they both have in common? Is sine theta. So I factor it out. And then lo and behold, right? 1 plus sine theta divides out, and I'm left with sine theta. Done. Number 12. Number 12 is very similar to number 11. So I'd like you to press pause and follow and see if you can do it before I do it. All right, here we go. Let's see if you did it right. So first, common denominators. Second, we're going to do a substitution with parentheses. So sine squared is equal to 1 minus cosine squared. Next, we're going to combine like terms. So 1 take away 1. And then I have a negative cosine. And then a negative times a negative is plus cosine squared. They both have a cosine theta in common. I need one to be positive so they can cross out. So I'm actually going to factor out a negative cosine theta, because a negative and a negative makes it positive 1, and then a negative and a positive makes it minus cosine theta. And you can double check. What's negative cosine theta times 1? Matches. What's negative cosine theta times negative cosine theta? There's the square. And then divide out, and you have your answer. Man, did you get that before I did it? I'm super proud of you. All right, number 13. I want to write this as one fraction. And not only that, I need things in terms of sine and cosine as well. So I see secant. That's 1 over, what is it? Cosine. Cosecant. 1 over sine. And sine over cosine, well, let me just let that go for now. Next, I'm going to multiply times the reciprocal. So it's 1 over cosine times sine over theta over 1. They multiply together. And what do you see? They're exactly the same. And these are two trig identities, the same one, right? What's sine over cosine? So what's sine over cosine? And it's tangent, both of them. So really, this is just tangent theta plus tangent theta, which means the answer is 2 tangent theta. And you did it. All right, number 14, just a few left. In number 14, we want to get one denominator. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction times 1 minus sine theta. And then the second one I'm going to multiply by cosine. And I know cosine times cosine is cosine squared. And then I have one denominator here of cosine theta times 1 minus sine theta. Our next step is we're going to FOIL. So I'm going to do that right here. So 1 minus sine theta and 1 minus sine theta. If I multiply it out, and then combine like terms. So that's 1, that's minus 2 sine theta, and then plus sine squared theta. And we still have cosine squared theta there. But why did I make that a minus? That's definitely a plus sign. That's going to make a difference. All right, so I'm looking, what's my next step? Because it's a plus sign, I can see my next step. Do you see it now? What's sine squared plus cosine squared? That's 1. We're now going to start making it simpler. So at first, when you expand, it looks like you're not making it simpler. But then, it will start getting simpler. And then 1 plus 1 is 2. I wonder if you can already see ahead what we're going to do. We're going to factor a 2 out. And then recognize what divides out, 1 minus sine theta. And then no fractions. What's the reciprocal of cosine? And you have your answer. It's 2 cosine. It's 2 secant theta. All right, 2 more. See if I can get my noggin in the middle of that camera there. Here we go. I need to create, is this very similar to what we just did or not? A little different. Anyways, we need to get one fraction here. So instead of 1, I'm going to be 1 plus cosine theta over 1 plus cosine theta. That's 1. And now we have common denominators, so now the tops we can bring together. They're unlike, so I just subtract sine squared theta. Next, I'm going to look again, what's sine squared theta? So to get sine squared theta by itself, subtract cosine squared, so it's 1 subtract cosine squared, so that we can have just one ratio. So we're subtracting, and then sine squared theta is this. Now we're going to combine like terms. So 1 take away 1, they're done. That's 0. We have cosine theta minus cosine squared theta. We're going to factor. Oh, and a negative times a negative is positive. Man, those signs are important because now they divide out and the answer is just cosine. All right, 2 left. That's just the right amount, I think, of practicing. Tangent is sine over cosine. To get common denominators, there we go. We're going to multiply by 1 plus sine theta. And we're going to multiply by cosine. So if I multiply by cosine, that becomes cosine squared. So sine theta times 1, sine theta times sine theta. And do you see what we're going to do next? Once you see the numerator, hopefully you see it. So sine squared plus cosine squared is just 1. Notice sine theta plus 1 and 1 plus sine theta, they're exactly the same. No fractions, 1 over cosine, and the answer is secant. All right, 1 left, number 17. All right, I want to simplify this with trig identity. So I need common denominators. So I'm going to multiply by 1 plus sine theta. Make sure my signs are right. And then this one I'm going to multiply by cosine theta, top and bottom. That's just squared then. This here in front is a difference of squares, so I don't need a box. 1 times 1 and negative sine theta times sine theta. Now, the numerator almost looks like that identity, right? But our identity is not negative sine squared and negative sine squared. But we can factor. And so what we can do is factor out a negative to make them positive. So factor out a negative. Now they're positive. And then see what happens. What is sine squared plus cosine squared? That's 1. And then what's 1 take away 1? 0. Divided by, doesn't really matter, right? And the answer is 0. That's it. Mr. G Math over and out. I'm super proud of you for doing your work. I know it was a little challenging, but we got through it together. Until next time.